On behalf of the Polish Book Institute, the Polish Cultural Institute in London, and the Polish Cultural Institute in New York, I am pleased to announce that the 2020 Found in Translation Award goes to Anna Zaranko for her translation of the Memoir of an Anti-Hero by Kornel Filipowicz, published by Penguin Modern Classics in 2019. 2019 brought a great range of excellent Polish books published in English. The entries showcased renowned classics next to contemporary voices and represented various literary genres, from prose to poetry, children's literature to academic essay writing. The jury chose to recognize Zaranko's translation for its quietly understated yet immensely evocative rendering of Filipowicz's prose, which the Sunday Times' David Mills described as provocative, troubling, awkward, a proper classic. Anna Zaranko was born in England to Polish parents. She took a first-class degree in Russian from the University of Durham and went on to hold 2 British Council scholarships at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. She studied Polish literature at Oxford University and moved into publishing, alongside freelance editing, writing, reviewing, and of course translating. In 2015, she was an American Literary Translators Association's mentee and worked together with Bill Johnston. She is currently working on Władysław Reymond's Chłopi, The Peasants, short stories by Kornel Filipowicz, and Julia Fiedorczuk's Pod Słońcem, Under the Sun. Her other translations include A Portrait of the Provinces by Jacenty and Katarzyna Dendek, short stories by Julia Fiedorczuk, and Ghetto Diary by Janusz Korczak, just to name a few. We would like to invite you for a short interview with Anna, celebrating her work and her achievements. Congratulations, Anna.
I was absolutely thrilled about it. I really hadn't thought that well, the Filipowicz it seems like it's such a small work. I didn't know, whether it would be noticed. I was very thrilled by the reviews it got. It was well reviewed, and in the TLS and in the Times. So that was great. And I'm just very, very pleased for Filipowicz as a writer himself. I know that there's a renewed interest in his work in Poland, and that's great. So I'm hoping that the prize will incline a publisher, an English publisher, to take on his short stories, a collection of his short stories, which I'm also working on at the moment. It was a complete accident. I certainly didn't set out to be a translator. After I finished my degree, I went to Poland for a year on a British Council scholarship to Krakow. And when I came back, I was completely fascinated with all things Polish. So I went to everything. I went to exhibitions, I went to films, I went to history lectures, I went to political demonstrations, you name it, I went to it. So eventually I was going to be in the right place at the right time. And people just started to ask me to translate things, all kinds of things. And so it was like a kind of apprenticeship, if you like, where I just learned totally on the job. And until I shifted gear at one point when I had to do a translation for Pauline, which is a journal of Polish Jewish studies, which had really only just started up then. Of course, it's still going now. And this was an article by someone called Roman Zimat. He was a literary critic, kind of literary historian, I suppose. He's Jewish, based in Warsaw. He had been a member of the party, but then later on became involved in the opposition. He wrote for Cultura in Paris as well under a pseudonym, this kind of thing. Anyway, so I had this essay to do, which is quite a sensitive, long piece called Wormwood and Ashes. And it had the very provocative subtitle of Do the Poles and Jews Hate Each Other? So I did this piece, and I happened to be in Warsaw, and he wanted to see me and talk about the translation. And so I went to his flat, and he opened the door, and the first thing he said to me, and I was quite young then, the first thing he said to me was, this is not a good translation. And at this point I thought, okay, I'll just sink into the ground right now. But then, we sat down and he made tea and we went through the translation. And it was really, I would say, the first personal translation workshop that I had ever been to. And at that point, that did really make me much more self-conscious and aware of what I was doing. Not that I hadn't been before, but perhaps not quite so, not so consciously. Well, I don't know if I'd use the word proud, but some are very memorable, but for different reasons. I mean, obviously, I'm quite happy with how Filipowicz turned out. Obviously, another translation that that was quite difficult, but I hope turned out well. I don't know if I'm the one to say whether it did or it didn't. Was Janusz Korczak's Warsaw Ghetto Diary, and when I was working on that, I was very aware of an enormous tension in the text, and trying to get that across was quite challenging. And so I do remember working on that very well. Yeah. Well, it's the opportunity to do an incredibly close reading of a kind that normally you wouldn't do. Maybe you don't have time or you intend to, but you don't. But when you're translating, you really have to take the text apart. And when you do that, there are always surprises. You always discover things that you weren't expecting. And it's really quite a privileged, I'm talking about literary translation here now. I mean, it's really quite a privileged activity as well to be able to do that and get to know a text on that kind of level. I don't think there's any other activity quite like it. Well, Polish is a very different language from English, because it's an inflected language. You can change the word order. It's incredibly flexible and elastic. And of course, English doesn't work like that. That trying to move from that, to move something from that into English can be quite difficult. I'm very impressed with Polish verbs. The way that it's all the prefixes. I mean, you can start with just a basic example, something like kręcić, and then you can do nakręcić, dokręcić, podkręcić, zakręcić. You can't do that in English. You just have to have a wide vocabulary, and so you feel that you're losing nuance when you do that. I mean, it's not necessarily true, but you can end up in a situation where you are, rather than show, you're always told at school when you're writing, your first efforts at creative writing, to show, not tell. And the temptation as a translator, because you think of yourself as a technician a lot of the time and not a creative writer, is to tell rather than to show. And you really have to move away from that. You have to take off the technician's hat at some point in your work and put on the hat of the creative writer, however briefly. And so, yes, I would say that is one of the greatest challenges. I'm working on a number of different things, but I suppose the main thing is Chłopi, The Peasants, by Władysław Reymont, which is obviously a great classic of Polish literature. It won the Nobel Prize in 1924. It's a very long novel, and it has all kinds of very specific challenges. So yes, that's what I'm working on. Well, I was approached by Hugh Welshman. He and Dorota Kobielska are making a film of Chłopi. It's going to be made in the same way as their previous film, which did very well, Loving Vincent. And they thought that since the film is coming out in 2022, I believe, it would be good to have a new translation of Hopi available for people who saw the film and then were interested in reading the book. So he suggested this, and it was Magda Raczynska at the time who got in touch with me and said, would I be interested? And at first I thought, absolutely no way am I going to do this. It is absolutely impossible, because anybody who knows Hopi knows that I think about 40% of it is actual dialogue, which is in dialect, and then some of the narrative is also written in dialect. And we had a lot of toing and froing about how this was actually going to be done, and there was some suggestion that it would be in English West Country dialect, and I thought, there is just no way I'm going to sit here for 2 years translating into a West Country dialect. It will just sound like a kind of pastiche. So it took quite a long time to work out how to do it and how to find a voice for it. And so we'll see. I'm sure everybody will have their own ideas about how it's turned out, but I hope they'll enjoy the novel anyway. Well, it depends on the book, really. So with Raymond, obviously, I have to do quite a lot of background reading. I always have. I don't use any particular dictionary. I have any number of them, open on my laptop at any one time. I always have, for some reason, I always have Doroszewski, and I always have him in the same place. You know, you have your tabs across the screen, and he's always number 2. And if he's not there, or if I put him in the wrong place, I get very annoyed. So I always have to have him there. I don't know why. But other than that, I use all kinds of things. I find with Raymond, there are some really wonderful Instagram sites. There's one in particular that I look at quite a lot. I think it's Muzeum Wsi Mazowieckiej, and that it's got masses of information, background information that's incredibly useful to me, with some very nice photographs as well, because when I'm doing Raymond, I find that I need to see to really understand what he's talking about, especially when it comes to things like, farm implements or just all kinds of, the realistic detail in Hopi. I actually have to see it before I feel I can translate it properly. I would say that when it comes to deadlines, it's very difficult to work out how much time you're going to need to do something. And I would say you should always add on more time if you can. It's not always possible. More time than you think you're going to need, partly just so you can get away from the text and come back to it. I think for really experienced translators, maybe they need to do that less. But I think in the beginning, when you're starting out, you really need to factor in some time away from the text so that you can then come back to it with slightly with fresh eyes.
The Founding Translation Award has been funded in 2008 and is run collectively by the Polish Book Institute, the Polish Cultural Institute in London, and the Polish Cultural Institute in New York. The award is given annually and usually to the best translator of a single book of Polish literature published in the previous calendar year. For more information, visit our website instytutpolski.pl/London and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.